Texas, September 1880. Before the sun got serious about the day, a bullet had been sitting in a man's thigh for 4 days, and the man who put it there knew exactly where he was lying. Hill country stretched in every direction beneath a sky so wide it made a man feel small. Brown grass, limestone the color of old bone. A town that existed because stopping was easier than going on. In a place like this, people learned one thing early. Silence was a form of self-preservation. Then she arrived. Before the sun got serious about the day, one woman with white hair, one horse, one saddlebag. On her right hip, an old Navy Colt worn smooth, not for show. A tool. She counted every man watching her before she even climbed down from the saddle. In the corner of the saloon, a stranger set his coffee cup down with his left hand, keeping his right hand free. He had been looking for her for 14 months. For a reason she thought had been with her husband 10 years ago. And the first words out of his mouth would tear down everything she believed was true. "I'm here because of your husband." Texas in September of 1880 did not forgive weakness. The land made sure of that. Hill country stretched in every direction like something ancient and indifferent. Brown grass. Limestone ridges the color of old bone. Sky so wide and so blue, it made a man feel small in ways that church never could. The kind of sky that didn't care about your problems, didn't care about your name, didn't care whether you lived or died on the ground beneath it. Dead Horse Creek was the kind of town that existed because stopping was easier than going on. Not pretty, not ugly, just there, a general store with a porch that leaned slightly to the left, like a man who'd been drinking since noon and was trying not to show it. A livery stable that smelled the way livery stables always smelled, animal and hay and old leather and something underneath that you didn't want to examine too closely. A saloon called the Dusty Spur with a sign so faded that nobody alive in Dead Horse Creek could remember what color it had started as. A doctor's office with a crooked door that never quite closed all the way. A church that held services every other Sunday because the preacher had 2 towns to cover, and God apparently was fine with that arrangement, the kind a place where everybody knew your name, and everybody knew your business, and nobody said a word about either. Because in a town like Dead Horse Creek in September of 1880, silence was a form of self-preservation. You learned early which things were safe to know about and which things were safer to pretend you hadn't noticed. Most people in Dead Horse Creek had learned that lesson. The ones who hadn't were either gone or in the ground. She arrived before the sun got serious about the day, before the saloon unlocked its doors, before the general store turned its sign, before most of Dead Horse Creek had finished its first cup of coffee and started thinking about what kind of trouble the day might bring. One woman, horse, one saddlebag. That was it. The horse was a roan mare somewhere past her prime, not young, not fast, but patient and steady in the way that only came from years of carrying someone through situations that required patience and steadiness. She picked her way down the main street of Dead Horse Creek, like she owned every inch of that road and was simply allowing others to use it while she passed through. The woman on her back was 58 years old. White hair pulled back tight, not a strand out of place, a gray dress, clean and plain, the kind of dress chosen specifically because it would not be remembered. 2 hands resting easy on the reins, capable hands, the kind that had done hard work for so long that the hardness had become just the natural shape of them. And on her right hip, settled into its holster like it had always lived there, a Navy Colt revolver, old, worn smooth along the grip, the kind of worn that came from 20 years of daily use and careful maintenance. Not a display piece, not a decoration, not something a woman carried to make a point, a tool. Her name was Nora Callum, and Dead Horse Creek had no idea what had just walked through its front door. She tied the throw rail outside the doctor's office. Didn't look around, didn't check who was watching, because she already knew who was watching. She'd done a full count the moment she rode in. 3 men outside the general store, 1 boy sweeping the boardwalk in front of the saloon, a woman in a second-floor window above the dry goods, and 1 man leaning against the corner of the livery stable, pretending to clean his fingernails with a knife, not actually cleaning them. That last one was interesting. She filed it away for later. She knocked on the doctor's door once, didn't wait for an answer. Walked in, the front room was empty, medical smell, carbolic, and something older underneath. The specific combination of in a room where people had been frightened and had sat with their fear and had waited for someone to tell them what to do about it. She went through to the back. The man on the cot was in his middle 30s, brown hair grown out past the point of intention, several days of beard, a bandage around his right thigh that had been put on by someone who knew what they were doing, not a doctor. Because no doctor had been here yet, the bandage was Nora's work. She'd arrived 2 hours ago, not to this office, not through the front door of Dead Horse Creek at all. She'd come in through the wash behind the livery in the dark, with a lantern she'd kept carefully shielded. She'd found this man in the room behind the saddle shop where he'd been hiding for 4 days, with a bullet in his leg, and nobody to help him, and the specific kind of fear that came from knowing that the people who put the bullet there knew approximately where he was, and would eventually stop being patient about finishing the job. She'd cleaned the wound, packed it, wrapped it tight, then she'd told him to sleep. He'd tried to argue. She'd looked at him. He'd gone to sleep. Now she checked the bandage in the morning light, pressed 2 fingers along the outside of the wrapping, testing for heat, for swelling, for the particular kind of tightness that meant infection was setting in under the surface where you couldn't see it yet. Not yet good. The man's name was Cass Pruitt, 35 years old, a bullet in his right thigh, 3 cracked ribs from a fall off his horse 2 weeks prior, the kind of injury that made every breath a small negotiation, and a piece of information that could bring down the most powerful man in hill country, which was exactly why someone had put the bullet there in the first place. The door to the back room opened. Dr. Bart Heller walked in, 62 years old, round face, neat gray mustache. The kind of man who had been reassuring patients for so long that reassurance had become his default expression, even when he wasn't feeling it. The kind of man you trusted instinctively because he had the face of a man who deserved trust and had spent decades making sure you believed that. He stopped when he saw Nora, not surprise, more like recognition. The specific recognition of a man who has had this experience before and understood exactly what it meant and was deciding very quickly how to respond to it. "You got here before me again," Heller said. "I usually do," Nora said. She didn't look up from the bandage. Heller set his bag down on the side table, came to look at Cass, checked his pulse, examined the bandage, pulled back the edge carefully to look at the wound underneath. He nodded once. Slowly. "Clean work," he said. "Thank you. He needs to stay off that leg for at least 2 weeks. No, he won't be able to ride." "I know that too." Heller straightened, looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes. A thought that came and went so fast she couldn't quite read it. But she noticed. She always noticed. She just didn't say anything about it. Not yet. Because noticing and knowing were 2 different things, and she made it a point never to act on one when she only had the other. "You're staying in town?" Heller asked. "For now. Silas Drum is in town." "I know." A pause. The kind of pause that had weight to it. "He knows about Pruitt," Heller said. "Everybody knows about Pruitt," Nora said. "That's the problem with small towns. They're terrible at keeping secrets." She pulled the edge of the bandage back into place, pressed it smooth, stood up, put her hat on. "I'm going to get breakfast," she said. "Keep an eye on him." She walked out. And Bart Heller stood there in the quiet of that back room, looking at the man on the cot, looking at the door she'd just walked through, looking at his own hands, which were very still, too still, like a man concentrating very hard on not letting them shake. The Dusty Spur Saloon at 8:30 in the morning. Nora walked in and took the bar stool at the far left end, where the bar met the wall, the seat that gave her a clear line of sight to the door and every table in the room simultaneously. That seat she always chose, because she'd learned a long time ago that where you sat in a room was a decision, not an accident, and the wrong decision could be permanent. "Coffee," she said. "If you have it." The bartender, big, somewhere around 50, with the kind of face that had learned to stay neutral as a professional skill, looked at her. "We have it." "Then I'll have it," he poured. Set the cup in front of her. She turned slightly on the stool. Casual, easy. The way a woman turned to look at a room when she was just killing time. 3 of the men at tables were local. She could tell by the way they sat. The comfortable, boneless slump of men in a familiar space. Ranch hands. 2 of them looked like brothers. Same jaw, same way of holding their coffee cups. The third was older, with the weathered patience of someone who'd been working the same land for 30 years and planned to do it 30 more. The fourth man was not local. Corner table. Back to the wall, dark jacket, plain waistcoat. Ordinary hat set on the table beside him. Nothing about him said dangerous except his coffee cup was in his left hand, his right hand rested on the table, open, easy, but positioned. The way a man positioned his hand when he wanted it close to something without making it obvious, that was what he was doing. And his eyes. Not doing what eyes in a morning saloon usually did, which was stare at nothing while the mind went somewhere else entirely. His eyes were counting, assessing, cataloging. The same thing hers were doing. He'd clocked her the second she came through the door. She knew because of the slight shift of his body. Barely anything, really, just a fraction of adjustment that a trained person made when a new variable entered their field. She filed him away. Interesting. She drank her coffee. 20 minutes later, the saloon door opened, and the temperature in the room dropped, not literally, but close enough. Silas Drum walked in like a man who owned the building, which he might have. It was genuinely hard to say, in Dead Horse Creek in 1880, what Silas Drum didn't own or couldn't buy, or hadn't already arranged to his satisfaction, through one method or another, 50 years old, well-built. Gray at the temples in a way that looked like authority rather than age. Dressed well. Not flashy, not showy, but the specific quality of a man who understood that money spoke its own language. And clothing was one of the dialects worth learning. 4 men came in behind him. They spread out when they entered. Easy, practiced, covering angles. Drum went to the bar. Nodded at the bartender. Morning round, he said. Pleasant, easy. For everyone, it was the gesture of a generous man. Except it wasn't about generosity. It was a demonstration. Look at what I can do. Look at how easy it is for me. And then consider what that tells you about everything else I'm capable of. The bartender poured. Drum turned around with his drink and let his eyes move around the room. They stopped on Nora. Something passed across his face. Not surprise, not displeasure. The expression a chess player made when he saw an unexpected piece appear on the board. Not alarmed. Just recalculating. He walked over, sat down on the stool next to hers. One seat over, didn't ask. Mrs. Callum, he said. It's been a while, Mr. Drum. I didn't know you were in the area. I didn't know I needed to announce myself. A small pause. Drum looked at his drink. Cass Pruett. He said. Not a question. The name is familiar, Nora said. He's a thief and a liar, Drum said. Still easy, still pleasant. Like a man discussing drought patterns or cattle prices. He committed perjury in the county land court 2 years ago. Cost good hard-working families their land. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious fact. He turned his drink slightly on the bar. I want you to know, in case you've heard something different, that whoever you've come to Dead Horse Creek to protect, it isn't a good man. I'll keep that in mind, Nora said. Drum studied the side of her face. You're not easy to read. Mrs. Callum, no. That's unusual. Most people, I can tell what they're thinking in about 30 seconds. I'm sure that's very useful, it is. He set down his drink. Stood up, straightened his jacket. I just want things to be peaceful. That's all I've ever wanted. Peaceful, orderly. Fair, of course, Nora said. He nodded at her, walked away. And the temperature in the room went back to what passed for normal. Nora finished her coffee. Did not look at the man in the corner. Did not need to. Because she knew he'd watched all of that, and she knew he was going to come over. He waited 5 minutes after Drum left, which she respected. He came to the bar. Sat down 2 stools over. Not crowding, not cautious. Just the right distance. The distance of a man who understood that space was a form of communication. You counted him before he came in, the man said. I count everyone, Nora said. So did I. He ordered coffee. Waited for it. You knew his name before he said it. I've been in Dead Horse Creek before. So have I. He picked up his cup. My name is Dex Weiland. I know who you are, Nora said. That stopped him. Just for a moment. How? You rode the train in from Austin 3 days ago, Nora said. Before that, Fredericksburg. Before that, San Angelo. You've been working your way through hill country for about 6 weeks, talking to people who've lost land disputes in the last 5 years. Silence. You're not local law, she said. Too careful. Local law in Texas in 1880 doesn't have to be careful. You're federal. Or close enough that the difference doesn't matter out here. Dex looked at her for a long moment. All right, he said. What else? You've Been looking for me specifically, she said. Not Cass Pruitt. Me. Because you need something I have access to, and you've been trying to figure out the right way to approach me. Another pause. Longer. 5 minutes wasn't long enough, apparently, he said. 5 minutes was plenty. I'd figured you out in 2. He almost smiled. Almost, Mrs. Callum, he said. Yes, I'm here because of your husband. The room didn't change. The sounds didn't change. The light through the dirty windows didn't shift. But something in Nora Callum went very still. Not the stillness of surprise. The stillness of a woman who had been waiting 10 years to hear a sentence start that way. Who had been preparing herself all that time for the sentences that came after it. Owen, she said. Yes. He's been dead 10 years, I know. The case was never investigated, I know that too. The county sheriff ruled it a robbery, she said. Owen was found on the road 2 miles outside of town. No witnesses, no suspects, nothing taken from him. Official determination, robbery gone wrong. The official determination was a lie, Dex said. Very still. Tell me something I don't know, she said. Dex turned his coffee cup in his hands. Looked at it for a moment. Owen didn't die because he found evidence against Drum, he said. That's the part I think you already know. Or suspect. What you don't know, what I didn't know until 14 months ago, is how Drum found out that Owen had it. She said nothing. Someone told him, Dex said. Someone Owen trusted. Someone close enough to know what he'd gathered and where he was going with it and what specific night he planned to ride to Kerrville to deliver it. Around them the morning saloon went on. 2 men laughed at something at the far table. The bartender wiped the bar. Outside a wagon went down the street, wheels creaking on the dry ground. Who? Nora said. Dex met her eyes. That's what I need your help to prove, he said. She walked back to the room behind the saddle shop. Alone because she needed time to think before she talked to Cass Pruitt. And she needed time because what Dex Weiland had just told her was rearranging things inside her head that she'd believed were fixed. Permanent, settled. 10 years was a long time to build a structure around what you knew. Owen found evidence. Drum found out. Drum had him killed. Those were the walls. Simple, solid. She'd pressed her hands against them for a decade and they hadn't moved. But if someone told Drum, then there was a person, a specific person. Someone close enough to Owen to know his plans and his movements and the specific night he'd chosen to ride. Someone who might still be in Dead Horse Creek. Someone she might still know. She stood outside the saddle shop for a moment. Looked at her hands. Steady good. She went in. Cass Pruitt was awake. Sitting up against the wall, his wrapped legs stretched out in front of him, with the particular expression of a man who'd been lying still for so many hours that the stillness itself had become a kind of suffering. He looked at her when she came in. You saw Drum, he said. I did. He told you I was a liar. He did. Did you believe him? Nora sat down on the 3-legged stool across from him, looked at him directly. The kind of look that had caused many people over many years to tell her things they had not planned to tell anyone. I want to hear your version, she said. Cass looked at his leg, at the bandage, at the worn wood of the floor between them. Everyone wants my version, he said. The version that explains why I stood up in court in 1878 and said things under oath that weren't true. Then explain it. And you'll what? Decide if I'm worth protecting based on whether the explanation is good enough? I'll decide if I understand the situation, Nora said. Which I need to do before I can be useful to either of us. He looked at her. She looked back. He moved first, the way people always moved first when Nora Callum decided to wait. My daughter, he said. Just that. 2 words. And then a pause like he had to get his breath back after saying them. She was 9 years old in 1878, Cass said. Her name is Willa. She has her mother's eyes. She learned to read before she turned 6, and she draws her drawings or something. The horses, especially. They look like actual horses. Which sounds simple, but it isn't. He stopped. Looked at the wall. For a moment Drum's men took her on a Tuesday, he said. I came home and she wasn't there. My neighbor said 2 men had come to the house while I was in the field. Said they had a message for me from her father, which confused my neighbor because she knew I was her father. The men left with Willa. My neighbor didn't know what to do, so she stood there. The room was quiet. They kept her for 3 days, Cass said. Drum came to me on the first day, very polite, very calm. He said there was a land dispute hearing coming, and he needed a witness to testify to certain things. He'd heard I was an honest man. Honest men made the best witnesses because people believed them. A pause, I told him no. A longer pause. He said that was fine. He understood completely. But his men were enjoying the company of my daughter, and they might get confused about when to bring her back if they didn't have clear instructions. The instructions they had right now were from him. Until he gave them new ones, they'd just keep following the old ones. The ordinary sounds from outside, a horse, someone calling to someone else. The creak of a wooden sign moving in the wind. I testified, Cass said. I said what Drum needed me to say. The Fenner family lost their land. 300 acres of good range they'd worked for 20 years. Drum bought it at the default price, which was less than a quarter of what it was worth. And Nora said, they brought her home. A pause. But she wasn't. He stopped. Started again. She'd been frightened, very badly frightened. She stopped eating for a week, stopped sleeping. She'd wake up in the night screaming and I couldn't get her calm again. Nora waited. She stopped talking, Cass said. About 3 weeks after they brought her back. Just stopped. The doctor in Kerrville said it was shock. Children sometimes respond that way. She might recover it eventually. Is she still? She's 11 now, Cass said. She still doesn't talk. He was so quiet for a moment, but she draws. The horses are still really something. Nora looked at him. The look wasn't sympathy exactly. It was something more specific. The recognition of a person who had been broken by something they couldn't stop and was still standing afterward, held together by nothing. Much more than the continued need to be standing. You're not a bad man, she said. I'm not a good one. You're a man who was given an impossible choice and made it the way any father would. And then punished yourself for it ever since. I cost the Fenners their land. Drum cost the Fenners their land, Nora said. You were the instrument. He was the cause. There's a difference. Not to the Fenners, no, she said. Not to them. She was quiet a moment. Which is why you decided to come forward. 2 years later. To testify again. Truthfully this time, Cass nodded. Because if I don't, he said, then what Drum did to Willa just happened. For nothing. And more families lose more land. More children get frightened. The whole thing just keeps going. And Drum had you shot. 3 weeks ago, Cass said. I was in Kerrville. Had an appointment with a lawyer. Never made it. The bullet hit me in the alley behind the hotel. You're lucky to be alive, I'm aware. Stood up. I'm going to make sure you stay that way, she said. She moved toward the door. Mrs. Callum, Cass said. She stopped. Why? He asked. You don't know me. I told you myself I'm not a good man. Why does it matter? Nora stood in the doorway for a moment, not looking back. Because it always matters, she said. And because someone once told me that the measure of a place isn't its worst days. It's who shows up on those days. She went out. She didn't explain further. She didn't need to. That afternoon she found Dex Wyland at the edge of town. Standing near the water trough, watching the mangy street with the quality of attention that looked like idleness and was anything but. Tell me everything, she said. He did. Silas Drum had been operating in hill country since approximately 1872. Before that, a different part of Texas, different but related things. The pattern was consistent everywhere he went. Identify land worth having, approach the owner with a purchase offer, apply pressure when the offer was refused, apply something worse, when pressure wasn't enough. By 1880, Drum had acquired somewhere between 25 and 30 properties in hill country. Some of those acquisitions were legal or close enough to legal that proving otherwise would require documentation that tended to disappear. Whenever Drum's men were in the vicinity of a courthouse. The Fenner case in 1878, the one Cass had testified in, was unusual, only because it came with a witness who was afterward willing to come forward. Most of Drum's methods left no such witnesses, or the witnesses changed their minds. Or the witnesses had regrettable accidents. The federal interest came from a judge in Austin named Holbrook, who had been building a case for 3 years and kept hitting the same wall. Drum's network of bought local judges and cooperative law officers made it nearly impossible to get anything to stick at the county level. You needed federal involvement. You needed evidence that crossed county lines. You needed a witness who couldn't be reached or bought or frightened into silence. You needed something almost impossibly difficult to assemble in Texas. In 1880, Owen was the first one who came close. Dex said they were walking by then, not toward anywhere. Just moving because movement looked like purpose. He'd been gathering evidence for about 2 years, Dex said. Methodically, quietly, documented transactions. Found discrepancies between official land records and what Drum was actually paying. Found the names of 3 judges who'd received money. Had a paper trail going back to 1872. I didn't know any of this, Nora said. He didn't tell you. On purpose, a pause. Long he was trying to protect you, Dex said. Yes, Nora said. That's what he always did. Not bitterness in her voice, not grief exactly. Something that had become so familiar over 10 years that it had worn itself smooth. Like stone in a river, still solid, just smooth. He was planning to ride to Kerrville, Dex said. He'd contacted Judge Holbrook in Austin, arranged a meeting. The night he planned to go, someone warned Drum. Who knew? Nora asked. That's the question. He'd told very few people. He was careful. But a man can't do 2 years of that kind of work in a small town without some support. Without trusting someone, she walked. You have a name, she said. Or you suspect one. I have evidence that points in a direction, Dex said carefully. I don't have enough to prove it. Not yet. And I need someone who knows these people. Who can move through this community and get answers that an outsider asking the same questions wouldn't get. You need me. Nora said. I need you, he agreed. And if the name you suspect is someone I know, Dex looked at her. Then it's someone you know, he said simply. She thought about Bart Heller, the hands that were too still, the eyes that moved away, something she'd noticed that morning. Filed away. Hadn't done anything about because noticing wasn't knowing, and she didn't act on one when she only had the other. All right, she said, all right, I'll help you. She stopped walking, turned to face him. But you need to understand something first. He waited. This isn't about justice as a concept, she said. I'm not interested in concepts. I'm interested in specific people in specific situations and the specific harm being done to them. Cass Pruitt is one of those people. Gideon Pell. I know about Pell, Dex said. Then you know this isn't just about building a case for your federal judge in Austin. It's about making sure the people in this valley can keep what's theirs. I'm not disagreeing with you, good, and I'll need your full honesty. Everything you know, everything you suspect. Nothing held back because you think I might not handle it. Agreed. One more thing. What? Whoever told Drum about Owen, she said. When we find out for certain, I need to be the one who confronts them. A pause. That's personal, Dex said. Yes, Nora said. It is, he considered her for a moment. Agreed, he said. The sky over Dead Horse Creek turned the color of embers before dark. Red at the horizon. Orange above it. The blue at the top going deep and final and irreversible. Nora sat on the step outside the room where Cass was resting. She was thinking about Owen, not his face, though she could still see that clearly. 10 years being apparently insufficient to blur the image. Not their life together. 22 years. The kind of partnership that forms when 2 people are equally stubborn and equally honest and have the rare good sense to recognize those qualities in each other. She was thinking about his hands. He had the hands of a man who'd grown up doing physical work before he became a judge. Big hands. Careful. He used to say that a judge needed careful hands because everything that came through a courtroom was something somebody had broken and was trying to repair. She used to tease him about that. He'd smile. God, she missed that smile. 10 years and she missed it the same amount. She'd expected the missing to diminish. People said it diminished with time. People lied, or they were lucky, or both. She heard footsteps. Knew without looking. You're not sleeping, Dex said. Neither are you. He sat down on the step below hers, leaned against the rail. Looked at the sky. They sat in silence for a minute. Which was how she knew she could probably work with him. A man who couldn't silence was a man who filled it with things better left unsaid. How long have you been doing this? He asked. Moving through places. Protecting people. 10 years, Nora said. Since Soren. Since Soren. What was the first time? She thought about it. A woman in Mason County, she said. Her husband was not a good man. The law in Mason County was his cousin. There was nobody in a position to do anything about it. What did you do? I stayed with her for a week. Made sure she and her children got out. Made sure they had somewhere to go. Made sure he didn't follow. And the husband? He reconsidered certain choices he'd been making. A pause. How many people? Dex asked. Over 10 years, she thought. I keep a list, she said. I don't count it often. But the last time I counted 83. He was quiet for a moment. 83, he said. Men, women, children. Ranchers, merchants, people passing through who found themselves in bad situations. Some who were born in places like this and couldn't leave, and needed someone to stand between them and the thing coming for them. The stars came out over hill country, one by one, and then all at once the way stars always did, as though they'd been waiting just behind the blue. Mr. Wyland, Nora said. Dex. She looked at the sky, the person who told Drum about Owen. When I find out for certain, I need you to understand that it will be hard for me. I know, not because I can't handle it. Because some things are hard regardless of whether you can handle them. And I prefer to acknowledge that in advance rather than pretend otherwise. I understand, he said. She nodded. Good night, she said. She went inside, and on the step, Dex sat alone with the stars, and the cooling Texas air, and the particular weight of a man who had been carrying a piece of information for 14 months that was going to hurt someone who deserved to be hurt by it, about as little as anyone he'd ever met. Inside, Nora checked on Cass one last time, seething, breathing even. Bandage holding, she stood in the doorway and looked at him, 35 years old, a daughter who drew horses and couldn't speak. A conscience that had finally gotten loud enough that he was willing to risk his life to answer it. She looked at her own hands, thought about Bart Heller, the two still hands, the moved-away eyes. The 30 seconds of expression that had crossed his face when he walked into the back room that morning and found her there, that she hadn't quite been able to read, she thought, and when she went to sleep that night, on the floor, back against the wall, the Colt beside her right hand, she slept the way she always slept, light, ready, listening, like a woman who understood that the quiet before trouble was still part of the trouble. It was deciding now. She could feel it. She was up before 4, not because she'd set herself to wake, because she hadn't truly slept. Not the kind that rested a person. More the controlled stillness a body fell into when the mind refused to stop working, the body's compromise between the need for rest and the impossibility of achieving it. The floor of the back room was hard. Cold by midnight. The kind of cold that came up through wood and into bone and reminded you, with patient certainty, that you were not as young as you used to be. She'd felt that reminder before. Many times. She'd stopped finding it interesting years ago. She checked Cass first, still sleeping, good color, bandage dry. She pressed 2 fingers to the back of his hand, temperature normal. The wound was not going to take him, not this week, not if she had anything to say about it. She put on her hat, picked up the Colt, walked out into the dark. Dead Horse Creek before dawn was a different place than it was during the day. Quieter. More honest. The way places were honest when there was no one left performing for. She walked the town slowly, not anxious, just looking. The way she always looked at a place she was going to have to defend, because that was what was coming. She knew it the way she knew weather, not from a specific sign but from the accumulated weight of everything. The air. The way Drum had sat beside her. The way his men had fanned out when they entered. The way he'd left without threatening her. Men like Drum didn't leave without threatening. Unless they were past the point of threatening. Unless the next step wasn't warning, it was action. She counted exits from the main street. Noted which buildings had second floors with windows that opened toward the road. Then she walked to the livery, checked her mare. The roan looked at her with the patient expression of a horse that had been through enough to know that early mornings meant something was about to happen. No, Nora said. She gave the horse a handful of grain. The roan ate without drama. Good horse. Dex was outside the saddle shop when she got back. Coffee in hand from the saloon kitchen, already open for ranch hands who started before sunrise. He held out a second cup as she approached. She took it. They stood in the street and drank and said nothing for 2 full minutes, which was how she knew she could work with him. A man who couldn't stand silence filled it with things better, left unsaid. I sent a telegraph last night, Dex said, to Austin, Judge Holbrook's office. Let them know where things stand. How long for response? Day, maybe 2. We may not have 2 days. No, Dex said. We may not. She drank her coffee. Tell me what you know about Gideon Pell, she said. 65 years old. Union veteran, which had made him certain kinds of enemies in certain parts of Texas that he'd lived with for 15 years and stopped worrying about. He'd built his ranch in hill country in 1866. Good land, good water. A spring that ran clear even in the worst drought years. 340 acres built with his hands and his son's hands, and the labor of men he'd paid fairly. Drum had made his first offer in 1877. Pell had said no. Second offer in 1878. Higher. No again. After that the offers stopped, and other things started. A fence cut. Cattle spooked onto a neighboring property. A grass fire that started at the edge of his range and moved inward before the wind shifted. An employee who quit suddenly and wouldn't say why. The kind of pressure that didn't leave marks you could point to in court. He's still there, Nora said. Still there, still refusing. Then that's where we need to go. Dex looked at her. The evidence, he said. Owen's satchel. If Pell has it, he has it, Nora said. A pause. How do you know? Because I knew Owen, she said. And then quietly, knew. Because I knew Owen, she looked at the street. He trusted 3 people in Dead Horse Creek besides me. One of them was Gideon Pell. And if Owen was hiding something he needed to last, he'd have given it to the man with the least reason to be bought. A stubborn old rancher who won't sell his land no matter what. Exactly. She finished her coffee. We leave tonight, she said. After dark. All 3 of us. Cass can't ride properly, I know. We'll manage. She turned toward the saddle shop. Mrs. Callum, Dex said. She stopped. The person who informed on Owen, he paused. I've been going back and forth about how to tell you. But you said you wanted full honesty. She turned around, looked at him. He looked back, and she saw in his face the expression of a man about to confirm something he knew she'd already suspected. Heller, she said. Not a question. Dex's expression didn't change. I'm not certain. I have evidence that points in a direction, Nora said. You said. A long pause. He was in Drum's pocket at least as far back as 1869, Dex said. Drum held a debt. Heller's father borrowed money from Drum's land company when they first came to this part of Texas. When the father died, the debt transferred. Drum never pressed it. He just held it. A leash, Nora said, a very long leash. But yes, she stood still. Outside in the street, a dog trotted past, with the purposeful optimism that dogs brought to the search for breakfast every single morning, regardless of how many times it had previously failed to produce anything worthwhile. Does Heller know that I know? She asked. I don't think so. Good. She turned back toward the saddle shop. Keep it that way, and after I'll handle, she said. She went in to check on Cast awake, sitting up, eating with the resigned determination of a man told by someone he wasn't going to argue with that he needed to eat. He looked at her when she came in. We're leaving, he said. Not a question. Tonight, my leg will hurt. She sat on the stool across from him. There's no version of this where it doesn't hurt. We can manage the hurt. We can't manage what happens if we stay. Cass looked at his wrapped thigh. The reality of cracked ribs and a bullet wound and 28 miles in the dark on horseback. How far, he asked. 28 miles north. On horseback. There's no other way, and when we get there, we get what Owen left. You give your testimony to the federal judge. Drum is finished. Simple as that. Except nothing about it was simple. Cass knew that. What if the judge doesn't come, he said. He'll come. And if Drum gets there before us? He won't. Because he doesn't know where we're going. He knows we're here. He'll watch this building tonight. And we won't be in it. Cass looked at her for a long moment. You've done this before, he said. This exact kind of thing. More or less. Does it always work? She held his gaze. No, she said. Not always. He appreciated that. She could see it. The honesty of the answer landing differently than reassurance would have. But more times than not, he asked. Yes, she said. More times than not, he nodded once. The nod of a man making peace with a decision he'd already made. All right, he said. Tonight, the middle of the day was the hardest part. Not because anything happened, because nothing happened. And the space where nothing was happening was full of things getting ready to happen. Nora spent the afternoon in visible stillness. Sat outside the saddle shop. Walked to the general store and bought nothing in particular. Went back to the saloon and read a 3-week-old newspaper that someone had left on the bar, visible. Purposely visible, because if Drum's men were watching, and she'd counted at least 2 of them in the street, pretending to be involved in things that didn't require the amount of standing still they were doing, she wanted them to see a woman settling in. Comfortable, unhurried. Not a woman preparing to leave, Dex understood. He made himself visible too. went to the general store, had a long, apparently aimless conversation about drought conditions. Got a haircut that took 45 minutes and left him looking more or less the same as before. Meanwhile, behind the saddle shop, in the quiet of mid-afternoon, the horses were being fed extra grain, water, the specific preparation that animals needed before a long, hard ride. Not rushed. Just done. At sunset, Drum came to find her. Not in the saloon. In the street. Alone, which was the part that made her more alert, not less. Drum alone was a choice, and his choices were worth paying attention to. He walked up to where she was standing outside the general store and stood beside her, looking down the street. Hands in his jacket pockets, not threatening, just present. "You're thinking about leaving," he said. She looked at the street. Said nothing. "That would be the smart play," he said. "Take Pruitt somewhere. Give him time to heal. Come back when things are quieter." "Things don't tend to get quieter," Nora said. "In my experience, that's because you keep making them louder. Or they were always loud and I'm just the one listening." Drum smiled. The small, almost appreciative smile of a man who found a particular opponent interesting. "I have a proposal," he said. "I'm sure you do. Leave Dead Horse Creek. Take Pruitt. Go wherever you're planning. And in exchange," a pause, "I'll stop. The land, the pressure, everything. I'll leave Gideon Pell alone. I'll leave the remaining ranchers in the valley alone. New direction for my business interests." She looked at him then, really looked. The thing about Silas Drum was that he was difficult to read because everything he showed you was chosen. Every expression, every word, the pleasant manner and the reasonable tone, all of it selected and deployed with the precision of a man who had been doing this for a long time and was very good at it. "You're afraid," she said. Something moved in his face. "I'm being practical," he said. "You heard that Wyland is a federal investigator," she said. "And you're calculating. If Pruitt testifies and a federal judge gets involved, you lose everything. But if Pruitt disappears or leaves voluntarily, there's no case. Just a woman and a man, and no evidence and no witness." Drum's jaw tightened. Barely. But she caught. "I don't respond well to being read," he said. "Nobody does," Nora said. "But I find it useful anyway, your answer," he said. "No," she said. "Think carefully." "I did. While you were making the proposal." "The answer is no." The pleasantness was still there in his face, but something behind it had shifted. "I've dealt with people like you before," he said. "Moral people. People who think the right thing matters more than the practical thing, and they were always right," he said. "In the end, I'll grant them that. But they usually lost a great deal on the way to being right." "Yes," Nora said. "They do." She met his eyes. "That's the cost," she said. "And it's worth paying." She walked back into the general store. Bought a small bag of dried fruit. Walked back out. Drum was gone. 3 hours after dark, they left, not through the main street. Through the wash behind the livery. The same way Nora had come in. 3 horses moving slow and quiet. Cass's jaw was set hard. Every step of his horse moved something in his leg and his side that did not want to be moved, but he made no sound. Not once. She respected that. Dex rode at the back. Watching behind them, nobody followed. At least not immediately, which meant Drum's men had lost them. Or Drum had decided not to follow. Both options required thinking about. They rode through the night. Hill country in the dark was different from hill country in daylight. The heat dropped fast once the sun went. The stars came out enormous and close. The kind of sky that made you feel that cities were a fundamental mistake, and that the people who built them had simply forgotten what the world actually looked like. Nora knew this land. 10 years of moving through Texas had given her the kind of knowledge that didn't live in the head but in the body. The way a horse felt moving over certain ground. The sound of a creek before you could see it. The specific darkness of a cut in the limestone that meant shelter and good cover. She rode point, kept them on ground firm enough for a horse carrying a rider who couldn't properly shift his weight to help with balance. They rested once around midnight. A flat limestone shelf beside a dry creek bed. Watered the horses from canteens. Cass got down with Dex's help and stood against his horse's flank for 10 minutes without speaking. Just breathing, just holding himself upright. Nora watched him. Watched the darkness around them. "How much further?" Dex asked. 4 hours, she said. "Maybe a little less." Cass looked up. "I can do 4 hours, I know," she said. "That's why I told you 4. He almost smiled. They got back on the horses and rode on. Just before dawn, Dex came up beside her. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. "Tell me, when I said I'd been looking for you for 6 weeks, he paused. "That's not entirely accurate." She kept her eyes on the ground ahead. "How long?" she said. 14 months. "I've known about you for 14 months. I knew where you were most of that time. He stopped. "You were building the case first," she said. "Yes. Making sure you had enough before you came to me." "Yes." A pause, and the other reason, she said. "Because there was one." She could hear it in the way he hesitated. "Owen asked me to wait," Dex said. "Not those words exactly. But in the letter, he left with Judge Holbrook, only to be opened if something happened to him. He described you, very specifically. He said you would need time. He said." Dex paused. "He said you would handle whatever came with ferocity, and that the important thing was to make sure you had enough information before you ran straight into it." The dark countryside moved around them. The horse's feet on dry grass, quiet and rhythmic. She ran straight into things. She'd done it for 10 years. Owen had known that, had loved it about her and worried about it in equal measure. Always both at once. He wrote a letter, she said. "Yes," anticipating that he might die. "Yes. And he didn't tell me." "No." A pause. "He wanted to protect." "I know what he wanted," she said flat. Not angry. Just a fact she had known for 10 years and was having to know again. "He was a good man," Dex said. "He was a complicated man who was also good," Nora said. "Which is not the same thing. Simpler men are easier to protect." Owen could never stop protecting other people long enough to let anyone protect him. She looked at the horizon. The very first pale suggestion that darkness was not permanent. "What did the letter say?" she asked. "Exactly." Dex reached into his jacket, pulled out an envelope, handed it to her. She took it, did not open it, put it in her own pocket. "I'll read it later," she said. "When I have time to do it properly, of course," Dex said. They rode on. Gideon Pell's ranch came into view as the sun broke the horizon. 340 acres of hill country grassland going gold in the early light. A spring glinting in the distance. Cattle on the far slope, still as painted things in the morning quiet. A stone house. A barn. A windmill turning slowly in a wind that hadn't quite reached them yet. Beautiful. The kind of thing that made it perfectly clear why a man would die before he'd sell it. Gideon Pell was on the porch, Winchester across his knees, coffee in his hand, like he'd been expecting them. Maybe he had. He watched them ride up. 3 riders, one not sitting quite right, one a woman of a certain age with white hair. He stood up. "Mrs. Callum," he said. His voice was deep, deliberate. The voice of a man who chose his words, because he understood there were only so many of them in a life, and he'd rather not waste the ones he had left. "Mr. Pell, you look like you've had a night." "We've had a night," she agreed. He looked at Cass, at the wrapped leg, at the jaw still set against the pane. "Get him inside," Gideon said. "Coffee's on." The inside of Gideon Pell's house was the inside of a life lived on purpose, nothing wasted, nothing decorative for decoration's sake. A table built to last 3 generations, chairs worn smooth by consistent use. A shelf of real books. Not for display, the spines cracked and softened from actual reading. On the wall, a photograph of a woman younger than Gideon, smiling in the way of someone who found life genuinely amusing rather than merely tolerable. His wife. Gone now, the photograph the particular kind of gone that meant carefully preserved rather than put away. They got Cass onto a cot in the back room. He was white by then, jaw still set, hands steady only because he was concentrating very hard on keeping them that way. "Sleep," Nora told him. "I should," she said again. He slept. She came back to the main room. Gideon had poured coffee. Dex was at the table. She sat down. "He knew," she said. "He left something with you." Gideon looked at her over his cup. "He did," Gideon said. "He gave it to you about 2 weeks before he died." 2 weeks and 3 days, Gideon said. "He rode out here on a Tuesday afternoon, stayed for supper. We talked about a lot of things. The land. The cases he'd been working. What he thought was coming. What did he think was coming? He thought Drum was going to move against him. He didn't know when. But he'd felt it for a month. The way a man feels weather before it arrives. Why didn't he come to me?" Nora said. The question came out more raw than she'd intended. Gideon looked at her. "Because you would have tried to stop him," Gideon said. "Simply. Not from fear. Not because you're that kind of woman. But because you're the kind of woman who stands in front of things. And he didn't want you standing in front of this one." She sat with that. It was not a new thing to sit with, but it was a heavy thing. Every time the evidence, she said, Gideon stood up, went to the far wall, the shelf of books, pulled out a thick old volume. Behind it, the wall was not solid wall. A section of stone had been set loose and could be moved. He reached in, pulled out a leather satchel, small, worn. She recognized it immediately. She'd given it to Owen for their 18th wedding anniversary. Good leather, solid brass clasp. She'd had his initials stamped on it. A Nora Callum. She took it, held it, felt the weight, not heavy, but not nothing. She opened the clasp. Inside, a journal. Owen's handwriting, precise, measured. The penmanship of a man who had spent 20 years writing court decisions and understood that how something was written was part of what it meant. Page after page. Names, dates, figures, transactions. 3 judges in 3 separate counties. Land acquisitions that looked legal and weren't. Intimidation documented with the careful specificity of a man who knew exactly what documentation needed to contain to be useful in a courtroom. And at the back, a single folded paper. She unfolded it, Silas Drum's signature. At the bottom of a payment record, money to account judge named Weathers in exchange for a specific ruling in a specific case. Drum's own hand. His name. She sat very still. 10 years, she thought. This has been sitting here for 10 years. He never told me he'd given it to you, she said, to Gideon. He told me he'd told no one except the person carrying it. And only enough that they'd know to bring it to you if something happened. Who carried it? Gideon looked at her. Long. Who carried it, Mr. Pell, she said again. Bart Heller. Gideon said the room was very quiet. Heller brought it out here, Gideon said. Owen trusted him. Had trusted him for years. Heller rode with Owen that Tuesday. Said he had calls to make in the area. Owen was glad of the company on the road. She understood fully, completely. Heller had ridden with Owen to this ranch. Had watched Owen give Gideon the satchel. Had known what was in it, or close enough. Had known Gideon had it, and had told Drum none of that, because Drum hadn't asked the right questions yet. Or because somewhere in Bart Heller's complicated, compromised, frightened conscience there was a line he hadn't crossed. Yet does Drum know you have it, Dex asked. Not specifically, Gideon said. He knows Owen was here that day. Heller told him that much, I suspect. But whether Heller told him about the satchel, he shook his head. If he had, Drum would have come for it years ago. She closed the satchel. Thank you, she said to Gideon. Gideon waved it away. The wave of a man who found gratitude for basic human decency unnecessary. She liked him immediately and completely. That afternoon, Dex sent a telegraph from the relay station 4 miles south of Pell's land. A rider from the ranch carried it. Holbrook's office in Austin, everything they had. Where they were. What was coming? Now, we have the evidence. We have the witness. Come now. The reply came back in 2 hours. 12 words. Judge arriving Dead Horse Creek in 3 days. Do not move the witness. 3 days. Nora, read it. Read it again. Handed it to Dex. 3 days, she said. Yes. Drum will know where we are before 3 days. Probably, she looked at the satchel, at the ranch. At the stone house built 20 years ago by a man who had decided this was his land and he was going to keep it. Then we prepare, she said. She found Gideon on the porch that evening. Sun going down over his 340 acres. Cattle coming down to water, windmill turning. The spring catching the last light. He's going to come, she said. Drum. When he figures out where we are. I know, Gideon said. More men than before. He knows what's at stake now. I know that too. She looked at the land. You could tell us to go, she said. Take Pruitt and the satchel and fight this somewhere else. Gideon was quiet for a moment. This is my land, he said. Built it with my hands. Buried my wife here. He looked at the cattle moving slowly on the slope. I'm not leaving it. Not for Drum. Not for anyone. She nodded. Your son, she said. Levi, Gideon said. 22. Good with a rifle. Better than me, honestly. Though I don't tell him that. When he gets back from the east fence tonight, I need to talk to both of you. About positions. About what to do when shooting starts and what to do if it starts going wrong. Gideon looked at her. You think it might go wrong, he said. I think it always might, she said. The ones who don't think that are the ones who get surprised. He almost smiled. Owen said you were the most honest person he'd ever met, Gideon said. Owen was biased. Probably, Gideon said. Didn't make him wrong. Levi Pell was 22 years old and looked like his father through the eyes. and his mother through everything else. He came back from the east fence at dusk, with the easy confidence of a young man who knew his land and his horse, and not quite yet enough about the rest of the world to be properly afraid of it. He shook Nora's hand when his father introduced her. Firm, direct, met her eyes, good. She sat them both down at the table and laid it out flat. No softening, no hedging. Men like Gideon and Levi Pell didn't need things softened. They needed the truth with enough time to get used to it. She told them about Drum, about the federal case, about 3 days and 15 or more men coming to a ranch defended by 5 people, one of whom couldn't walk. She told them what Drum would do if they lost. Not just the land, the whole decade of it. Levi listened, face still, jaw tight in the way of a young man being told something that required him to be older than he currently was. What do we do? Levi said when she finished, tonight we walk the perimeter. You show me every defensive position on this property, every place a shooter can see without being seen, every weak point. And tomorrow? Tomorrow we prepare those positions. Make the house as hard to enter as possible without making it impossible to exit. And when they come? Gideon said. When they come, Nora said, we do the only thing left late that night. Cass was awake in the back room, sitting up, eating something Gideon had brought him. Nora came in. You found it, he said. Whatever Owen left, I found it. Is it enough? Yes, she said. It's enough. He ate. She sat. The wind came up off the hills. Through the gaps in the stone, the sound of it made the old house feel like it was breathing slowly in the dark. Nora, Cass said. She looked at him. My daughter. Willa. He turned the spoon in the bowl. If something happens to me, nothing is going to happen to you, she said. But if it does, it won't, Nora. He looked at her directly. Please. I need to say this. She stopped. He was right. He needed to say it. Her grandmother has her, Cass said. My wife's mother. In Fredericksburg. She's a good woman. She'll take care of Willa. But if you could, he stopped. Started again. If you could tell her that her father came back, that he tried, that he did the thing he should have done. Nora looked at him. The quiet of the stone house, the wind. Somewhere distant, an owl asking its one question. You can tell her yourself, Nora said, when this is over. But if I can't, then yes, she said. I'll tell her. He nodded. Ate another spoonful. She stood up. Rest, she said. He rested. She went to the porch. Alone, the night over hill country was vast. Stars too many and too bright, making the sky feel both close enough to touch and impossibly far away. She took Oren's letter from her pocket. She'd been carrying it since Dex handed it to her on horseback in the dark before dawn. She opened it now. His handwriting. Careful, measured. The same handwriting she'd read in court decisions and groceries lists and notes left on the kitchen table for 22 years. She read it. She wasn't going to tell anyone what it said. Not because it was a secret, because it was hers. Because there were things that existed between two people that belonged to neither of them fully but to both of them completely, and the moment you put them into the world, they stopped being that and became something else. She read it twice, folded it, put it back, looked the stars, the thing about being 58 years old, and alone in the Texas dark, with a letter from your dead husband in your pocket was this. You'd had enough years to know that grief and purpose could exist in the same body at the same time, could drive a person forward and hold a person together simultaneously, could be a wound and a source of strength in the same breath. She'd known that for 10 years. She pressed one hand flat against her chest, over the pocket where the letter was, just for a moment. Then she took her hand away, looked at the dark edge of the hills where the road came in from Dead Horse Creek. Somewhere out there, Drum was counting men and calculating distance. And she was here, making her own calculations. She put her hand on the Colt, not drawing it, just resting. The way she'd rested her hand there 10,000 times before. An old conversation between her hand and the gun. Familiar, reliable, 3 days. She could hold a stone house for 3 days. She'd done harder things. The wind came down off the hills, cold and clean. The kind of wind that woke you up. That said, pay attention. This is real. This is what you came for. She stood, and she prepared. They came on the 2nd day, not the 3rd, which meant Drum had figured it out faster than they'd calculated. Someone had talked, or someone had seen something on the road north, or Drum simply had more reach than she'd allowed for, and the calculation had been wrong from the start. It happened. You were prepared for what you knew, And then what you didn't know showed up early. 4 in the morning. Still full dark. Nora heard them before she saw them. The specific sound of horses on dry ground moving in formation. Many horses, moving with the deliberate quiet of men who knew they were approaching a defended position and wanted darkness on their side. She was already dressed, already armed. She'd slept the way she always slept near trouble. Light. Listening. One hand beside the Colt, she was at the window before the sound, fully registered in the part of her mind that named things. The deeper part, the part that 10 years of this work had built and sharpened below conscious thought, had already put her on her feet. The darkness outside was thick and moonless, but she could count shapes moving against the stars. 1, 3, 5, 7, 11, 15. She turned from the window. Dex, she said. He was already awake, standing at the far window. I see them, he said. 15. 15, he confirmed. She crossed to the back room. Gideon was in the chair beside the door. He'd slept there rather than in his bed, which told her everything she needed to know about what kind of man he was when it mattered. Levi was on the floor beside him. 22 years old and sharp-eyed in the dark. They're here, she said. Both of them were standing before she finished the sentence. Cass was already awake on the cot. He'd probably been awake for hours. The particular wakefulness of a man who can't do much and knows it, and has been lying in the dark listening for exactly the sound she'd just heard. Stay in here, she told him. The back door. I'll hold it, he said. You can't stand on that leg. I can sit on it, already moving, dragging himself upright. Pulling a chair to the corner beside the back door where a man sitting down had a clear angle on anyone coming through. Get me a rifle. Gideon handed him one without being asked. Cass checked the load, set his back against the wall, positioned the rifle across his good knee. Not a soldier, never had been, but a man who understood geometry and angles and the basic arithmetic of armed spaces. She looked at him for a second. He nodded. Once. She went back to the front. The positions were what they'd planned, decks on the roof of the barn. 30 yards east of the house, slightly elevated, a sight line over the front approach that nobody on the ground could match. He'd gone up 2 hours ago, already prone on the flat section, rifle in hand, watching the dark. Gideon at the front window. 14-inch limestone walls. The kind of walls that stopped bullets and had been doing so since before Gideon built them, because the men who first cut stone in hill country knew what the land eventually required. Levi at the south corner. The weakest approach, open ground between the outhouse and the barn. A man could cover distance there faster than anywhere else on the property. Levi had the angle. Nora at the east wall. A gap in the stone, narrow, deliberate, the kind of opening a rifle could use that a man shooting in from outside would struggle to hit. 5 people. Against 15, the math was bad. The math had always been bad. She'd been in bad math before. Drum rode to the front gate at 4:30. Him. Not one of his men, which told her something. He was either confident enough to feel no danger, or he needed to be seen leading it. Needed to demonstrate to the men behind him that he wasn't afraid, which would mean he was. She chose to believe the second. He stopped 20 yards from the gate. Gideon Pell, Drum said. His voice carried in the dark. Clear and even. The same pleasant measured tone he used in saloons and street corners. The tone that said, this is completely reasonable and I am a completely reasonable man and we can all go home if someone would just be sensible. The house was quiet. No response. I know you're in there, Drum said. I know Nora Callum is in there. I know Cass Pruitt is in there. And I know what you have. Still quiet. There is no federal judge coming, Drum said. I had a telegraph intercepted this morning. Austin knows nothing about a case. Nobody is coming for you. Nora listened. Lie. Almost certainly. But the particular kind of lie designed not to persuade, but to make a person doubt. To plant the thought. What if? What if the telegraph didn't go through? What if Holbrook changed his mind? What if Dex was wrong about all of it? She filed it away, didn't believe it, kept breathing. Gideon's voice came from inside the house. This is my land, he said, flat and final. You've got one chance to turn around, a pause. I gave you that chance in 1877, Drum said. And he raised his hand. The first shots came from the east. 3 men Drum had sent around wide in the dark. The flanking move, the obvious move, the one she'd prepared for. Bang, bang, bang. The shots hit stone. Because they were shooting at 14-inch limestone walls. Return fire from the east gap, Nora's first shot. Aimed at muzzle flash. The figure behind it went down. Not confirmed dead in the dark, but down and not moving one. And then everything happened at once. Because that was the thing about firefights that nobody told you beforehand. They were not sequential, they were simultaneous. Noise from 4 directions at the same time. Your brain trying to process competing inputs while your body was doing things your brain hadn't consciously decided yet. The animal need to get small and behind something solid, fighting the functional need to keep your eyes open and see what you were shooting at. She'd learned to manage that. Years of learning. She was still managing. Drum's men rushed the gate from the front, 6 of them. Running low, not charging straight on but spreading as they ran, forcing any shooter to choose between targets rather than simply following a line. Gideon chose. Bang. 1 man down at the gate. Levi chose. Bang. 1 man at the south corner stumbled, hit but not stopped, decks from the barn roof 3 times in fast succession. Bang, bang, bang. 2 men went down. 1 changed direction and ran back toward the horses. The 4th shooter from the south side made it to the corner of the barn, pressed flat against the wall below Dex's position. The 1 angle Dex couldn't reach from above. The man started moving toward the barn door. Nora saw it. Left the east gap. Moved through the house, fast. Through the main room past Gideon without a word. Out the side door on the north face of the house. The door that put her in the shadow between house and barn, invisible from front and south. The man was 6 feet from the barn door. He turned. She didn't wait. Bang. He went down. She went back inside. The whole thing 40 seconds. A lull. Drum's men pulled back. Reorganized. The way men did when the first push hadn't worked and they needed to recalculate. Gideon was reloading. His Leshtor moved stiffly, not wounded. 65 years of joints reminding him what 65 felt like. Levy at the south corner. Face pale in the darkness. Not falling apart pale. Absorbing pale. The specific color of a young man who had just shot a human being for the first time and was in the process of deciding what to do with that fact. He was doing it quietly. That was what mattered. Nora moved to him. "You're all right," she said. Not a question. A statement offered as support. He looked at her. "Yes," he said. After a moment. "I'm all right." She moved on, checked Cass in the back room. "Fine." Back door intact. Nobody had tried it yet. 6 down or gone, she told him. 9 remaining. Ammunition. Sufficient. Dex? Still on the roof, Cass repositioned the rifle across his knee. She went back to the front. The second push came faster. Drum changed tactics. 4 men to the east in a compact group, suppressing fire, constant, directed at the windows, designed to keep heads down, while 3 more went for the roof of the barn. Not to use the roof. To remove Dex from it, she realized what was happening a half-second before it happened. "Dex," she called. Loudest she'd been. "They're coming up the east wall of the barn. Move." A half-second pause from the roof. In the sound of boots on the flat section above, the 3 men hit the east wall and started climbing. Fast, purposeful. Dex was already rolling to the peak, away from the east side, taking position on the west slope where the angle changed entirely. The first man came over the edge, found no one where he expected someone. Found instead the open hill country air and the sound of Dex Weiland's rifle from 20 feet to his left. Bang. He fell back over the edge. The second man stopped climbing. The third let go entirely. 2 of Drum's men at the east window took shots at the roof. Suppressing fire. 4. Bullets hitting old wood from inside the house, from the east gap. 2 return shots. Both aimed at muzzle flash. Both accurate. The suppressing fire stopped. The pause this time was longer. Of the original 15, 9 capable, maybe 8, because from the back room came the single flat crack of a rifle. Then Cass's voice. Someone tried the back door. She moved to the doorway, 1 man on the back porch, half in and half out of the door frame. The door had been forced 3 inches and stopped against Cass's improvised brace, a chair leg wedged between the handle and the corner of the wall. The man had tried to force it. Cass had shot through the gap. "How are you?" Nora said. "Fine," Cass said. "My hands are shaking, that's normal." "Is it?" "Yes, for everyone. The ones whose hands don't shake are the ones to worry about." Then back at the door, 8 left, Nora said. The third push was different, because Drum himself came forward. She saw him through the east gap, moving up from the horses, no longer staying behind events. Coming in, pistol in his right hand, 3 men with him, covering angles, and something else, a lamp. One of his men was carrying a lit lamp. Fire, of course, if you couldn't get in, you burned them out. As old as siege warfare, as simple as desperation, the lamp man was moving toward the south side of the barn. Old wood. September dry. It would go up in minutes, and from the barn it would spread to the house. Levi, she said, through the wall. Loud enough lamp. South side. Man in a brown coat, 2 seconds, bang. The lamp man's arm jerked. He dropped the lamp. It hit the dirt and went out. Didn't shatter. Didn't catch. The man grabbed his arm and ran. She noted, very good shot. She would tell him so later. Right now she was tracking Drum. He'd stopped when his lamp man was hit. Standing in the open space between gate and house. 10 yards out. Pistol still in his hand. Looking directly at the gap in the east wall. Looking directly at her. She wasn't sure he could see her in the gap. Probably not. But the same way she'd always been able to read rooms and people, across distance, the way 10 years of this had built something in her beyond simple skill. She had the feeling he knew exactly where she was. Mrs. Callum, Drum said, not shouting, projecting. The voice of a man practiced at being heard without appearing to raise his voice. It's done, he said. You know it's done. I know it's done. 8 men left with me. 2 of yours are past 50. One of them can't stand up. She said nothing. Give me the satchel, he said. Give me Pruitt. I walk away. This ends. Still nothing. I have no interest in killing you, he said. Whatever you think of me, I have no interest in killing a woman. Especially not. He paused. Especially not Owen Callum's wife, her husband's name. In Drum's mouth, something in her chest tightened, but her hands were steady because she'd prepared for this too. Not the specific words, but the shape of it. The moment when a man running out of practical options tried the personal option, the mention of the dead, the appeal to grief, the suggestion that there was a shared acknowledgement between them that made further violence somehow unseemly. She'd seen it before. It was the last play before the brutal play. Which meant, Gideon, she said, very quiet. Gideon looked at her north window. Now he moved, because she'd seen the 2 men circling wide to the north while Drum was talking. The voice doing what voices did, occupy the mind while the hands moved unseen. Gideon hit the north window. Bang, bang. 1 man down. 1 retreating. Drum spun. Saw what had happened. And his face changed the pleasant mask. Gone. What was underneath wasn't rage. That would have been more understandable. What was underneath was cold. Pure cold. The expression of a man who had calculated and lost and was now calculating again. Faster. Harder. He raised his pistol. Aimed at the east gap at her. She moved, a fraction of a second left, away from the gap. The shot came through and buried itself in the far limestone wall. She came back up. 6 inches north of where she'd been, her Colt was already out. She fired through the gap. The shot hit Drum in the right shoulder. Not the chest, not where she'd aimed. He'd moved the same instant she fired. Both of them moving. Both of them adjusting in the fraction of a second they had. He went down 1 knee. Then the other. Then sideways, the pistol dropped from his hand. His 3 remaining men stopped, looked at each other, looked at their employer on the ground, looked at the stone house. One of them turned and walked back toward the horses. Unhurried. Deliberate. The walk of a man who had made a decision and was done. The second followed. The third stood for a moment longer, then he followed too. Silence. The absolute specific silence that only existed in the immediate aftermath of gunfire. Ears ringing. Smoke in the air. The world reconstituting itself around the sudden absence of noise. Nora stood still, counted. Her own heartbeat. Her own breath. The sound of Gideon reloading. Distant hoofbeats going south. The creak of the barn. The windmill still turning because the windmill didn't care about any of this. The first birds beginning somewhere far off, because birds did not stop being birds, because men had been shooting at each other. She moved to the door, opened it, stepped out. The light was coming up. East edge of sky turning from black to deep blue, to the particular purple of a Texas dawn in early autumn that had no right to be as beautiful as it was, considering what had just happened under it. Drum was on the ground, 20 yards from the gate. Not dead, she could see him breathing. His left hand pressed to the right shoulder. Face turned toward the sky. She walked out to him, stood over him. He looked up at her. His face was white. Not from the wound, serious but not immediately fatal. From the specific shock of a man who had never in his life been the one lying on the ground looking up. You could have left, she said. He said nothing. Last night. When you intercepted the telegraph, if that was even true, you knew the risk. You knew what was here. You came anyway. I couldn't, he stopped. Breathed. I couldn't let Nora Callum beat me. She looked at him. Owen's been dead 10 years, she said. I know. His jaw tightened. I know that. She crouched down to his level, not to be kind. To be clear, he built the case that's going to end you, she said. 10 years ago. Hid it where you couldn't find it. And it's been sitting there, intact and waiting and correct, the entire time you've been operating like nothing could touch you. Drum looked at her. He beat you 10 years ago, she said. He just needed someone to deliver the result. Drum was quiet for a long time. And then, quietly, so quietly she almost didn't hear it. He was a good man, Drum said. Yes, she said. He was. She stood up. The wound won't kill you, she said. The federal judge will handle the rest. She turned, walked back toward the house. Behind her, on the ground, Drum said nothing else. Inside, Gideon and Levi at the table. Both of them with hands around coffee cups. Not drinking, just holding something warm and solid and ordinary. The specific human need after violence to hold something ordinary. Dex had come down from the barn roof. Still at the window, still swatching, because doing it was more useful than not. She checked Cass in his chair. Rifle across his knee. Eyes open. The color had drained from his face sometime in the last hour and hadn't fully returned. It's over, she said. He looked at her. For now, she said, because that was the honest version. He nodded. Accepted it. She checked the bandage. The leg had held through the tension and the held stillness in the one shot he'd fired. The wound was not worse. Careful planning was frequently mistaken for luck. The people who mistook it weren't paying enough attention. She went back out. Dex was at the table now. Gideon had poured. The four of them sat in the stone house as the light came fully up outside. Not saying much, not needing to. There was a particular kind of quiet between people who had been through something together. Not comfortable, not uncomfortable. Something more specific than either. The quiet of people who now knew what the others were made of, and were sitting with that knowledge. 2 hours later, riders came from the south, not Drum's men. Different bearing. 8 riders. Official. The lead rider with papers folded into a jacket pocket. Federal. She'd know that posture anywhere. Dex came out beside her. Holbrook sent Moore, he said. Looking at the lead rider. Judge Moore. Junior Federal. But authorized. Drum's telegraph intercept story was a lie. I know, she said. You knew at the time. I knew at the time. She confirmed. Esex almost smiled, which by now she understood was his version of genuine admiration. Judge Moore was 40 years old. Neat. Efficient. The manner of a man given an important job who intended to do it without drama, which she found enormously refreshing. He sat at Gideon's table and read through Owen's Satchel in 45 minutes. All of it, every page. The journal, the payment records, the signature. He read without comment. When he finished, he closed the satchel. Looked at Nora. This is sufficient, he said. More than sufficient. Good, she said. The investigation into Drum's acquisitions will take time. Cases involving the corrupted judges will need to be reopened. Months, possibly longer. The ranchers who lost land, Nora said. Some may be recoverable, Moore said. Not all. The law isn't, he paused. The law isn't a perfect instrument. No, she said. It isn't. He looked at her steadily. But it's what we have, he said. And this, he put one hand on the satchel. This is what makes it function. Evidence, testimony. People willing to put their names on the truth. She thought about Owen building this, page by page, careful and methodical and alone, not telling her, trying to protect her. And the evidence sitting in a leather satchel in a hole in a stone wall for 10 years. Good leather, she thought. Solid brass clasp. He'd taken care of it. Of course he had. Cass Pruitt gave his testimony to Judge Moore that afternoon. Sitting at the table, legs stretched out, hand his knees. He spoke for 2 hours, all of it. The full account, Willa, the 3 days. What he'd done and why and what it had cost. Moore's clerk wrote it down word for word. When Cass was done, Moore asked 3 clarifying questions. Specific, precise. Cass answered all 3 without hesitation. Moore looked at him over the papers. That took courage, Moore said. It took longer than it should have, Cass said. Moore nodded. Wrote something, your daughter, Moore said. The situation you described, that's why I'm here, Cass said. Simply. She's 11. She still can't talk. But whatever happens to me, and I know I'm not clean in all of this, I needed her to know that eventually her father did the right thing. The room was quiet. Moore set down his pen. It will be on record, Moore said. What was done to her? What was done to you? Drum's men who carried out the abduction, we'll find them. Cass didn't say anything, just nodded, once. Then looked out the window at the late afternoon light on the hill country grass. And something in his face, some specific kind of held tension she'd seen there, since she first found him in the room behind the saddle shop, loosened. Not gone. Not all of it. But some. Drum was taken by Moore's men that evening. Shoulder bandaged by Bart Heller, who had ridden up from Dead Horse Creek that afternoon, uncertain, looking at Nora when he arrived with the eyes of a man, not sure whether he was about to be arrested. She'd looked at him. He'd looked at her. I'll do whatever you need, he said. Testimony, full accounting of everything I told him. All of it. She studied his face for a long moment, the face of a man she'd worked alongside for 10 years, who'd come into rooms where she'd already bandaged the patient and said she got there before him, who had a neat gray mustache and a reassuring expression and a terrible thing he'd done and had been carrying since 1870. Then do it, she said. Tell Moore everything. He did. She didn't forgive him. She wasn't sure she ever would. But she understood him, which was different, and was, she supposed, enough for now. That evening, the last evening on Gideon's porch before the world began its slow work of returning to whatever normal would look like after this, Levy was in the barn. She could hear him moving around, doing the evening work with the horses, ordinary sounds. The sounds of a ranch still standing and still functional and still his. Gideon sat in his chair. The was left he'd slept in for 2 nights waiting. He sat in it now without the Winchester. Just sat, looked at his land. She sat beside him. They didn't talk for a while. That was all right. She'd already said what needed saying, and so had he, and the rest could just be. He was a good man, Gideon said finally, meaning Owen. You said that already, she said, worth saying twice. She looked at the cattle on the far slope, moving back up the hill now that the day was cooling. The slow, purposeful migration of animals who had their own relationship with this land and intended to continue it, regardless of what men did to each other nearby. He trusted you, she said. He trusted a lot of people, Gideon said. He was that kind of man. One of them betrayed him. Yes, Gideon was quiet, and 10 others didn't. That's how it usually goes. Most people, when it comes to it, do the right thing. It's just the ones who don't that you remember. She thought about that. She thought about her 83. The names in the book she kept. And the other list. Shorter, the names she carried differently. Heller helped bring the satchel out here, she said. He rode with Owen. He watched Owen hand it over. And he never told Drum what was in it. Never told him you had it. No, Gideon said. He didn't. He told Drum where Owen was going the night Owen was killed. But he kept the one secret that mattered most. She paused. Maybe he didn't know what was in it. Maybe he didn't want to know. Maybe there was one line he couldn't cross. One line, Gideon said. Sometimes that's all a man has left. The wind came down from the hills, cool now, the day's heat leaving the ground. What will you do? Gideon asked. Stay until Cass is well enough to ride, she said. Make sure Moore has what he needs. And then? She looked at the horizon. There's a family in Mason County, she said. A widow with 3 children. Land dispute. Local law not interested. Gideon was quiet. It never stops, he said. Does it? No, she said. It doesn't. Does that bother you? She thought about it honestly. No, she said. Because the alternative is it stopping. And the only quiz is if everyone gives up. Or everyone gives in. And I'm not prepared to do either, Gideon nodded. The slow nod of an old man recognizing something he'd felt himself. Owen was lucky, he said. To have married someone like you. He would argue that I was the lucky one, she said. You were probably both right. She almost smiled, which for her was the equivalent of a genuine grin. 3 days later, Cass Pruitt loaded his horse. Leg still wrapped, still painful, but weight-bearing now. The kind of recovery that had crossed some invisible line from impossible to merely difficult. He was going to Fredericksburg, to his daughter. He stood by his horse in the morning light and looked at Nora. I'll testify again, he said. When Moore needs me. Whenever, wherever, I know, I mean it, I know you mean it. That's why I said I know. He stood there a moment longer. Thank you, he said. For not leaving me in that room. I don't leave people in rooms, she said. He nodded, mounted, winced, settled, looked down at her. If you're ever in Fredericksburg, he said, I'd like you to meet her. Willa, I'd like that, Nora said. He held her gaze a moment, then he rode south. She watched him until the road bent around the limestone outcropping and took him from view. Good man. Not perfect, but fighting toward good. That was all she'd ever asked of anyone. Dex was saddling up when she came back. He checked the cinch on his saddle, turned. They looked at each other. She'd known him for 4 days. She'd slept on the floor beside him, planned a defense with him, stood in a stone house while 15 men came to take everything they were protecting. Watched him fire from a barn roof in the dark with the accuracy and steadiness of a man who had done hard things for a long time and had made his peace with the doing of them. 4 days. Sometimes that was enough. The letter, Dex said. From Owen. You read it? Yes, he waited. He said you were honest, she said. He said if someone ever came to me from him, that was the thing to look for. Whether they were honest and you are, she said. More or less, he repeated. Nobody is honest without qualification, she said. But you're close enough. He absorbed that. If Moore needs me in Austin, he started. I know, she said. And if you need someone who knows hill country, I'll find you, he said. He mounted. Looked down at her from the horse. 14 months, he said. I'm sorry it took that long. It took what it took, she said. The evidence waited. Gideon waited. Cass Pruitt waited. She looked up at him. I waited. You didn't know you were waiting, he said. Doesn't matter, she said. The result is the same. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a small photograph. Worn at the edges, handed it down to her. She took it. Looked at it. Owen, younger than she remembered him. 30, maybe. Standing in a doorway she didn't recognize. Smiling at whoever held the camera, she looked up at Dex. Judge Holbrook had it, Dex said. Owen gave it to him along with the letter. Said to give it to you if you needed something to carry. She looked at the photograph. Owen's face. The smile she remembered, the one she'd missed every day for 10 years. Her hands were steady. That was the important thing. Her hands were steady. Thank you, she said. Dex touched the brim of his hat, turned his horse. Rode south. She stood in the yard of Gideon Pell's ranch as the morning moved toward its peak, the photograph in her hand. Hill country all around her. Brown grass and limestone, cattle on the far slope. The windmill turning in a quiet wind. The spring catching sunlight where it ran clear over the rocks. 340 acres, still here. Still Gideon's. She put the photograph in her pocket. The same pocket as the letter, both of them there now. 2 things from the same man, 2 things she'd carry. She walked back to the porch. Gideon was in his chair, Levi beside him. The 2 of them doing what they did, the easy wordless work of 2 people who knew each other's company, well enough that silence between them was just another kind of conversation. She sat. Gideon poured coffee from the pot he kept on the porch railing. Set a cup in front of her, Mason County. He said eventually, she said. She drank. The coffee was strong, bitter. Exactly right. The land stretched out in every direction. Big and old and indifferent in the way that good land was indifferent. It didn't care about Drum or Oren or federal judges or the specific weight of a woman sitting on a porch with a photograph and a letter in her pocket and 83 names in a small book and 3 new names waiting in Mason County. But it was still here, and so was she, which was, when she thought about it clearly, the whole point. Not glory. Not justice as an abstraction. Not the satisfaction of having won, because winning implied an end and there was no end to this. Just this being here. Still standing. Still able to go where she was needed next. She finished her coffee. Set the cup down, put her hand in her pocket, felt the photograph, felt the letter. Felt them there. Then she took her hand out, looked at her hands. Steady good. She had work to do.